how far should one nation, really go to influence another's internal business? And what happens when personal political ties get tangled up in that international mix? That's the really fascinating kind of evolving situation we're diving into today. We're looking closely at former U.S. President Donald Trump's proposed 50% tariffs on Brazilian imports. And this isn't just about economics, right? Trump himself has explicitly linked these tariffs to the criminal trial of Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro. So our mission in this deep dive is to, well, really unpack the layers here. It's unique. We'll explore the pretty overt political motives, the surprising economic facts that kind of contradict them, Brazil's really strong response asserting its sovereignty, and what this whole thing means for global relations, and well, the idea of national independence itself. We've gathered detailed analyses, official statements, expert takes, trying to give you multiple viewpoints on this. Expect some unexpected insights, I think, into how geopolitics is playing out economically. It's definitely more than just a news headline.
Exactly. This situation, it really does challenge the usual diplomatic norms. It's a pretty stark example of using trade policy not just for economic leverage, but, well, as a direct political tool, which, like you said, is quite a departure.
Okay, so let's start with the immediate trigger. Trump announced this huge hike, right? A 50% tariff on all Brazilian imports. That replaces the old 10% duty kicking in August 1st, 2025. But what I found just, wow, were his stated reasons. In his public letter, he ties it straight to Bolsonaro's trial. He called it a witch hunt that should end immediately, and even labeled it an international disgrace. From your view, how unusual is that level of direct interference using trade?
Well, that's the key question, isn't it? It's highly unusual. Really breaks the mold. Usually, trade actions get justified by economics, dumping, subsidies, maybe trade imbalances. But here, linking it directly to another country's internal legal process, a criminal trial, that's a big shift. It strongly suggests, like you said, personal feelings, political goals, rather than just economics driving things. So it's a very unique and maybe concerning precedent. It really blurs those lines.
And he didn't stop there either. He also brought up what he called insidious attacks on free elections and the fundamental free speech rights of Americans. Specifically claimed the Brazilian Supreme Court issued secret and unlawful censorship orders against U.S. social media companies, said they were threatening them with fines, even kicking them out of Brazil. And he told the U.S. trade representative to investigate Brazil's digital trade activities and unfair trading practices. A lot going on there. But here's where the economics just don't seem to fit. It really throws a wrench in it. Despite Trump talking about unsustainable trade deficits with Brazil, our sources, they clearly show the U.S. actually runs a goods trade surplus with Brazil, like $7.4 billion in 2024 alone, and over $90 billion since 2009. So what does that gap, that factual discrepancy, tell us about the real motivation here?
Yeah, it fundamentally undermines any economic case for the tariffs completely. Normally, tariffs are about fixing a deficit, right, or protecting an industry from unfair competition. But when the U.S. has a significant surplus, that argument just, it vanishes. So it pushes the whole conversation squarely into the political realm. Makes it pretty clear these tariffs are less about trade balances and more about using economic muscle for political reasons. And it's worth stressing again, that 50% rate, that's the highest against any country Trump announced. That really signals the intent.
Okay, so faced with this, how did Brazil react? Because the response from President Lula da Silva seemed, well, fast and really firm. Lula stated point blank, Brazil is a sovereign nation with independent institutions and will not accept any form of tutelage. Pretty strong words. And it wasn't just talk, was it? He pledged retaliatory tariffs if Trump goes ahead. Using a reciprocity law that Congress passed earlier this year, he summed it up nicely too. Respect is good, I like to offer mine, and I like to receive it. I know. I also heard he literally told his diplomats to send Trump's letter back if it shows up physically in Brasilia. Talk about a clear message.
Absolutely. Sending the letter back. That's a huge symbolic gesture, almost like a diplomatic mic drop.
Yeah.
It signals that Brazil sees this as an unacceptable attack on its courts, its sovereignty. And what's maybe even more striking is the national unity it sparked inside Brazil. That was unexpected. You're seeing Lula's usual critics, like the newspaper O Estado de São Paulo, actually backing his reaction. They called Trump's move a mafia thing and said Lula's response was correct. Plus, you have the heads of Brazil's Senate and Chamber of Deputies issuing a joint statement, saying Brazil has the means to protect our sovereignty and will act with balance and firmness. So this external pressure seems to have forged some real internal unity, cutting across those deep political divides. It's like a textbook case almost, of a nation rallying when it feels pushed from the outside.
That unity is fascinating, especially given how divided Brazil's politics can often be. Let's dig into that domestic impact a bit more. starting with President Lula. Some analysts are saying Trump's move might actually backfire on him, could be counterproductive. How could this whole thing, maybe paradoxically, end up boosting Lula's popularity at home?
Well, it's widely expected to trigger a pretty strong nationalist feeling in Brazil. That could definitely help Lula domestically. A lot of people are seeing this as a kind of political gift to Lula, maybe even a game changer for the next election. Why? Because it gives Lula a really clear story to tell. He can frame Bolsonaro as being responsible for any economic pain from these tariffs. Given Bolsonaro's perceived closeness to Trump and his son lobbying for these tariffs, and Lula, despite maybe facing some unpopularity headwinds lately, he's known as someone who doesn't back down from a fight. He could really use this scrap with Trump, as some put it, to rally his base and gain support. It internalizes the conflict.
Right. And flipping that coin, what about Jair Bolsonaro and his allies, Trump defending him so openly? Could that actually backfire on the Brazilian far right, especially with Bolsonaro's legal issues? Maybe just remind our listeners briefly, what are the main charges Bolsonaro is facing right now?
Sure. They're serious criminal charges. He's accused of leading a conspiracy, basically, to stay in power after he lost the 2022 election, allegedly involving plans for a military insurrection, declaring a state of siege, things like that. Really serious stuff. Bolsonaro denies it all, of course, calls it a witch hunt, says the justice system is being weaponized against him. It's important context, though, that Brazil's electoral court already ruled him ineligible for the next presidential race. And the Supreme Court has been pushing back against his assertions of power for a while. The general view is the judicial system is working independently, giving him due process. There are also these background worries that Bolsonaro might try to leave for the U.S. if convicted, which kind of highlights those perceived ties. And yeah, that detail about his son, Eduardo Bolsonaro, actively lobbying in the U.S. for these tariffs against his own country's economy. That might not sit well with some of his supporters back home. A tricky position.
Okay, let's zoom out again. Beyond Brazil's borders, what are the wider risks here for Brazil's international standing? A 50% tariff definitely raises the specter of a full-blown tariffs war, doesn't it, like we saw with the U.S. and China? And apparently existing trade talks between the U.S. and Brazil are now just sort of up in the air.
That's a crucial point, yes. And connecting it to the bigger picture, Trump's very transactional approach to foreign policy, it actually reinforces something Brazil's wanted for a long time, which is a more autonomous role on the world stage. For years, Brazil's been trying to diversify its partners, to champion a multipolar world, basically, less dependence on any single major power. This probably just accelerates that thinking.
You can really see that desire for a multipolar world in Brazil's strategy, can't you? They're building close ties with China, Russia, through the BRICS group. Lula's been vocal about exploring alternatives to the U.S. dollar in trade. And look at Brazil hosting all these major global summits. The G20 later this year, the expanded BRICS summit next July, the big climate conference COP30 in late 2025. It all seems geared towards increasing its global visibility, trying to shape international debates, almost like a response to feeling pressured. But we can't ignore the real economic pain these tariffs could cause, right? For key Brazilian sectors, They hit agriculture hard. Coffee, the U.S. is their biggest buyer. Orange juice, Brazil supplies most U.S. imports. Beef, soybeans, cotton, sugar. That sugar tariff could be 140%. And it's not just farming, it's industrial goods too. Steel facing 85%. Crude oil, Embraer planes, those are used all over the U.S. for regional flights. Niobium, even Toyota engines made in Brazil for U.S. cars like the Corolla and Camry. These are significant hits.
Oh, absolutely significant. Painful, no doubt. These tariffs, if imposed, could shave maybe 0.3% to 0.4% off Brazil's GDP growth. That's not nothing. However, Brazil is arguably in a stronger position than many developing nations. Why? Because its overall trade exposure to the U.S. is relatively lower. The U.S. market takes about 12% of Brazil's exports. China takes more than double that share. So compared to, say, Mexico, which relies heavily on the U.S. market, Brazil might feel less pain, gives them a bit more breathing room.
That's a really important distinction, and it actually leads to some unexpected potential opportunities for Brazil and all this uncertainty. Like, they might benefit from cheaper Chinese inputs if a new U.S.-China trade fight heats up. There's also talk that could attract investment that might otherwise have gone to Mexico, given some instability concerns there and maybe USMCA worries. And here's a twist. Maybe Trump's tough stance towards the EU could actually push the long-stalled EU-Mercosur trade deal closer to ratification. So yeah, what looks like a pure threat might open up some surprising new avenues for Brazil. Okay, lastly, let's touch on the legal side, the challenges to these tariffs. Trump used the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEPA. What kind of legal questions does that raise, and how could it be fought in court?
Yeah, this brings up big questions about executive power in trade. Really important ones. Remember, A U.S. Court of International Trade ruling back in May already found Trump had previously exceeded his authority using IEPA for tariffs without Congress's okay. Now, the Trump administration is appealing that decision. But the key thing here is Trump's letter. Opponents plan to use that letter, the one explicitly linking tariffs to Bolsonaro's trial, as evidence. Their argument will be that the economic reasons given are just a fig leaf, basically, a cover for political interference. And that could seriously undermine the legal justification for using those emergency powers in the first place.
So the legal fight is definitely ongoing. Oral arguments for that appeal are set for July 31st, I believe. It really highlights this tension, doesn't it, between executive power on trade and judicial checks and balances. And the very political nature of this particular move could be central to how the courts decide. So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, our listener, trying to navigate this world where economics, law, politics, even personal alliances seem increasingly tangled?
Well, I think the Brazil tariff situation is a really clear case study.
Yeah.
It's complex, driven by politics, challenging old trade norms. But at the same time, you see it strengthening Brazil's push for sovereignty, for diversifying its partnerships globally. It really just underscores how unpredictable international relations are now. The impact goes way beyond just trade figures. It touches national identity, global positioning.
Exactly. And maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. In a time when one country's legal processes can apparently trigger an